Hello and welcome to the Agile Speaker. In Season 4, we're turning the spotlight onto the speakers. I want to capture stories, experiences and helpful takeaways from clients I've worked with over the years, so you, our listeners, hear from the speakers themselves rather than advice from me. They come from a range of different sector, different size of business, different experience and background. But what connects them all is they've all taken to the stage, presented in the boardroom, pitched to investors, or have had to influence their audiences in some way. As you'll hear, I had such a great time catching up with all of them. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversations and that you find their advice and top tips helpful. Today, I'm delighted to have Ken Whipp with me. Ken is Programme Director at Scale Up Scotland. Ken, thanks so much for joining me. It's lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Pleasure to be here today.
So, Ken, we met about a year ago, I think, when we were both speaking at a Women's Enterprise Scotland event in Glasgow. And I was delivering a session on pitching to investors, and you were talking to the group about Scale Up Scotland and introducing the programme to them. Lynn Cadenhead from Women Enterprise Scotland then introduced us, and we started talking about the Scale Up Scotland programme, and you very kindly got me involved in delivering workshops this year. Can you start by telling us a bit more about the Scale Up Scotland programme, please, and the sort of people who come through the programme and the different cohorts that you support?
Yeah, sure. So Scale Up Scotland is an initiative that was developed by the Hunter Foundation a number of years ago, and we run 3 different programs. The most established program is what we call our Scale Up Scotland core program. That's been running since January 2018. It's an 18-month experience, which is comprised of 10 1.5-day events. And we typically aim that at businesses who would be somewhere between 1 and 10 million in terms of revenues, most likely got around 10 or more employees, excluding the founders. Although that's sort of not set in stone, we do make it the odd exception, when we come across an exceptional entrepreneur. So we're in our 4th cohort of that program. And I'm pleased to say that last year we were endorsed by the Scale Up Institute for that. So that's our most established program. This year, we launched a Scale Up 2.0 program, which is a sort of more advanced version of that. So the businesses who join that program would normally be 10 million or more in revenues, who we believe have the potential and matching ambition to scale those businesses to 100 million plus in the next 5 years. And one of the key differences between that and our core program is this isn't just for the founders, it's for the whole executive team.
Great.
Also this year, we launched a pre-scaler program, and that's aimed at sort of slightly earlier stage businesses who we think have got, potential to grow, but just need a little bit of a helping hand to sort of navigate their way through those next series of challenges. And we completed that in October, certainly something we're looking to do again next year. So they're the 3 different programs that we run. In terms of the sort of people who come through the programs, that's actually pretty varied. So we have a, open to all sectors approach. We think there's a lot of value in bringing entrepreneurs together who run very different businesses in different sectors, but are going through the same challenges. Typically, our experience is that 90% of the challenges are the same, regardless of the business or the industry they're in. Typically, those people will be highly ambitious. We're looking for ambitious founders who really want to build an enduring company that's going to create meaningful jobs in Scotland, help move the economic dial in Scotland. So when we select onto the program, we're looking for that mixture of, potential to scale, ambition, but it's also really important to us that they have the right mindset. So, a growth mindset, people who recognize their own limitations, people who have an appetite for continuous learning, see the value of being in a sort of peer-to-peer community and the opportunities that can present them with for their own development as well as their businesses. And just those sort of people with an inquiring mind.
Brilliant. And am I right in thinking all of the events are hosted at Blair Estate in Ayrshire?
Yes, that's right. So we acquired the estate at the beginning of 2022. We've been on the lookout for a number of years to try and find a permanent base for our programs and one or two other programs that the foundation supports. And after quite a long search, this sort of popped up. And we wanted a permanent base because we place quite a big value in how the right sort of environment can facilitate the right sort of discussions and learning, and being able to take people out of the workplace and get their mind in the right space whereby they feel they're away from the day job and they can just focus on why they're there is really important. And Blair provides an inspirational venue for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. And everything that you're delivering is all in person, isn't it, as well, at the venue?
Yes, all the events are in person. We did do a little bit of online stuff during COVID, but certainly we're very much an online model. An offline model, so it's all face to face.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and how many people have taken part so far? Can you tell us a bit about the impact that the programs have had on the businesses that have gone through it?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of our core program, so far, 50 businesses and 57 leaders have completed that program, and we're currently supporting 12 entrepreneurs on that. On our Scale Up 2.0 program, we've got 12 CEOs going through that currently, and a further 55 executive team members. And the pre-scaler program, which we recently completed, supported 38 business leaders over the duration of that program. In terms of impact, we capture impact data on an annual basis. So in terms of how we sort of perform today, we've only got that data currently up to the end of 2022. And we've not measured anything yet from our 2.0 or pre-scaler program. So this really only applies to the first three cohorts of our core program. So in terms of revenue, collectively, those three cohorts have grown revenues by 460 million from the time they commenced the program to the end of 2022. And to sort of put that into perspective for you, that's a 505% increase.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's really encouraging. I mean, obviously we wouldn't attribute that all to our interventions, but it's good to know that we've played a part in that journey for them. That group, they've also created an extra 2,594 jobs, and they've raised over 247 million in additional funding. And 3 of those businesses have subsequently achieved an exit.
Fantastic.
So quite a few of the things we cover are around, developing that leadership skill set, helping them understand what their organizational design needs to look like, how they attract talent. And then there's the sort of other things that you would generally expect to see in a scale-up program, internationalization, how to work with boards, what good governance looks like. We do some work around their strategy, really helping them understand where their point of competitive difference lies, and then having understood that, how do they actually develop an operating model that enables them to deliver on that? I think, the discipline of execution is really important in any business, and it's particularly important in a scale-up business where it's very easy to lose focus and become distracted by, a multitude of opportunities that might come along. So that discipline of execution, being focused on delivering the plan, is something that we place quite a lot of emphasis on. The 2.0 program is slightly different because these are far more mature businesses. Their employee numbers are higher. They've got, highly capable executive teams. So the work we do with the CEOs is very much around exposing them to sort of, conversations and masterclasses with, people who have achieved very significant growth, who can share their insights, the things they got wrong. And then the work we do with the executive teams is largely designed to give them a peer network. So we run retreats for functional heads. So we'll bring all the finance directors together. And that's an opportunity for them to, I suppose, build a peer network that's more relevant to their current situation. We do the same for heads of people, heads of operations, sorts of things that we typically do.
It's such a fantastic opportunity. I imagine, as you said earlier, giving them the opportunity to come away from the business, for the 2.0 program to be able to bring their teams with them, and then to be exposed to networks of people who are going through the same thing. Really, really fantastic, and great to have that opportunity to take the time out of the business to do it. And so really, it's a fantastic achievement what you've already done just in the last few years. And I'm looking at the website. There are loads of really brilliant testimonials in there as well from others who have been through it. I partnered with the program for the first time this year, and so far I've worked with the pre-scaler cohort. And my role working with the entrepreneurs going through it is to help them to articulate their business story, whether it's to investors or it might be to customers, potential hires, or other supporters. Now, as you know, I believe in the need to be agile across all the different situations, environments that we're communicating in. So being able to move from one environment to the next day to day and be able to deliver message and personality, whether that environment is formal, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, or less formal, where it's a much smaller group, might be a one-to-one, could be a team presentation or a pitch to a customer. In every single one of these situations, there might be an opportunity that arises for you in the business. So with that in mind, how does Scale Up Scotland support all of the people who take part in different programs to be agile? And also, can we talk about who you think these different audiences are that they are going to be speaking to?
Yes. So if you're the founder of a, whether it be a scale up or even a startup business or an established business, you're always having to deal with multiple audiences, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, the ability to be able to interact in a way that's relevant and impactful with those different audiences, I think is a core skill for an entrepreneur. You could be talking to investors that have currently, put money into your business. It could be investors that you're looking to attract, and you might be speaking to multiple, syndicates. Could be new customers you're trying to onboard, or, maintaining relationships with existing customers, your supply chain in terms of, the suppliers you currently have, new ones you're looking to attract. You might be trying to build strategic partnerships with other organizations, or speaking to your board, or even, the biggest challenge for any scaling business is access to talent, being able to attract that talent. And particularly in today's market where employees are significantly more motivated by, the purpose of a business and the values that underpin how they operate, being able to, articulate that in a really compelling way is very important. So you're dealing with those multiple audiences all of the time. And as a business grows, that becomes more complex. In terms of how do we support them? Well, in a number of different ways, really. First of all, we do some, specific formal skills training. An example of that being, the work we've done with yourself. But I think bringing people together in a safe environment and facilitating peer-to-peer conversations really helps with that, because it gives a business owner an opportunity to talk about a conversation that they're going to have, or a pitch or presentation they need to make to whomever that might be, and run it by their peers and get some feedback on that. Or if they've got a challenging situation, somebody else in the room will have encountered that and can say, well, here's the approach I took in that particular situation. So we do a lot to try and sort of facilitate that.
I imagine that also within the networks you're bringing together, they might well also have pitched to the same syndicates. They may be talking to the same kind of audiences if it's an investor pitch. So that's also helpful, isn't it? To learn intelligence, I suppose, from each other around the audiences that they're going to be speaking to.
Absolutely. So, if you take an investment as an example, a lot of the businesses that we work with will have already raised money by the time they join one of our programs and are probably going for their next round. A number of businesses will not have raised before, but are going to be doing it for the first time. If you look at the investment landscape in Scotland, it's typically the same organizations or, syndicates that you'll be pitching to. So there's a very high probability that someone in the room has pitched to that syndicate or has secured investment from that, whether it be angels, VCs, private equity. So that gives them an insight into, who they're going to be speaking to. But not just that, it gives them an insight into what are they going to be like to work with, should you secure investment. But again, I think, it goes back to, if you think about one of the key premises of pitching effectively, which is doing your homework, being well researched about who it is that you're going to be speaking to, and trying to, elicit as much information about your audience in advance. If you've got someone who's already had, a dialogue with that particular person or organization, that can be a really, really helpful resource to tap into.
And how do you feel you support them in being agile across those different situations?
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, I should say that a lot of the businesses that come onto our programs are already pretty agile, because they've had to be to, get themselves out of that startup phase into a scale-up phase. That agility is something that we look for in the people that we select onto the programs. However, it can be difficult to maintain that as you scale the business, because, as I mentioned earlier, scale involves additional complexity, often having to navigate your way through situations that you're coming across for the first time. And therefore, you're learning by doing, as opposed to putting into practice what you've learned elsewhere. So those themes that I talked to earlier around, developing that leadership capability, it is designed to help them do that. There's an element of scaling which involves, let's say, professionalizing the business, but not professionalizing the business where you lose that agility and you become too corporate. It can sometimes be a temptation to over-process or try and develop policies that actually, by the time you've developed them, will be out of date, because the pace at which you're running is such that, you can't be too rigid as you grow that business. So it's finding that right balance between, yes, you need some system and process, and there are some things you need some policy about, just for, if nothing else, from a good governance point of view, but making sure that's fit for purpose and it's not something that's actually going to constrain your growth. So helping them do those things is something I think helps maintain that agility that you had as a startup. That, if you can maintain that, it keeps you competitive. It enables you to react quickly to the competitive landscape, react quickly to, opportunities that may come along that hadn't been forecast.
So, Ken, you meet all of the CEOs who come into the 3 programs you deliver right from the start. You're working with the cohorts. You'll see them going through the programs, and you'll see them presenting in different circumstances throughout them. So what difference have you seen or experienced in the companies that Scale Up Scotland has supported in the way that they're communicating, the way that they're presenting and pitching?
Yeah, the difference is quite variable, really. And I think that sort of in some ways dependent upon how accomplished their skill set already is when they arrive at our door. So we've got a very broad range of people who come into the programs. Some have had, very successful corporate careers whereby, they've had huge amounts of investment in their personal development. They've experienced skills training. They're very adept at presenting and communicating. Others have only ever been in the entrepreneurial world and have not necessarily benefited from, that development and skills training. So they're very much having to learn as they do. So I think you get, I suppose, different levels of skill set, and therefore the changes that you see varies by the individual. But if I was to say, what are some of the common improvements that I see most readily? I think the first one is really being able to deliver a succinct message. Time is a commodity which isn't always kind to you in business, and you don't always have the amount of time that you might like to get your message across. So you have to be able to do that in a really succinct way. And part of that is making it really understandable to the audience. So some of the things that you see would be they improve just how they articulate their message. So things that often appear when they start out, like use of technical language, buzzwords that are specific to your industry or sector that nobody else understands, just removing all of that and being able to articulate in plain language what it is you do, what your value proposition is to the customer in a way that the customer completely understands. That's something that I see in businesses, particularly in the earlier stages where they've had an investment of some skills training. You notice that the way in which that message is communicated is far more effective and gives them a much better chance of achieving the outcomes that they want. Another change that I see is a general sort of growth in confidence. And I noticed this particularly with the pre-scaler businesses, many of whom had not had to do a formal pitch before, are not particularly experienced at presenting in many instances. And I think the first, real difference you can make to people when they're at that place is to help build their confidence. I think if you can build the confidence, then, the fine tuning and the refinement of their messaging is far easier to work on. So I've seen some very significant differences in those groups. In the more established businesses, I think one of the key changes I see there, because typically they're quite accomplished presenters. Yeah. But what I do see is a much, I suppose, better use of emotional intelligence in the way in which they communicate to the various different audiences. And that's something we sort of cover in the program to help them perhaps appreciate, well, if you're really clear about the outcomes that you're looking to achieve from, be it a pitch or a presentation or a discussion, and you're really clear about your audience, then you can use that emotional intelligence to find a better connection with who you're talking to, which again gives you a far better opportunity to achieve the outcome you're looking for. That's sort of a change that I've seen in quite a number of the entrepreneurs we work with.
Yeah. And I think that's where, for me, that's also where the agility comes in and how they communicate, because the more experience they have and the better the toolkit they have, the easier it's going to be for them to be able to adapt in different circumstances where, for example, something goes wrong at the last minute, or not something goes wrong, but something unplanned, unexpected happens. And where the start of the journey, that might just completely floor you and send you into panic. The more experience you've had and the better the toolkit, the more agile you can be in how you react to it.
Yes, absolutely. And, I can think of a number of examples where, that things just not going to plan have happened. I remember there was one CEO we worked with, and we'd done a day workshop on how to use the power of business storytelling in your communications. And a short while afterwards, he was down in London pitching to some venture capitalists. He was very well prepared, slide deck already, got there on the day, none of the technology worked. So he wasn't able to show his slide deck, which was obviously his structure for how he was going to deliver that particular pitch. So he just sort of paused for a short while and thought, right, what am I going to do here? And he remembered the session he'd done on storytelling and effectively just told a story that communicated the central messages that he wanted to get across. And on the back of that, he managed to raise a multi-million-pound investment. But that was just that agility, quick thinking. Things haven't gone to plan here. I'm probably not going to get the opportunity to come back and do this. So I have to nail it today. What am I going to do? And just having the confidence just to take that pause, gather your thoughts, reboot, and go for it. I've had it happen to me before, everything from sort of technology not working, and despite the fact that I'd done the preparation, but then not realizing somebody else had moved my presentation onto a different laptop, and all the videos I'd embedded in the pitch didn't work. I've certainly in corporate world, the norm is to go into a board meeting where, you've got half an hour to update and the person before you's overran. So your half an hour is now 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I remember being asked to go and give a short talk at a conference. And when I got there, I found the brief was rather different. And I was the keynote speaker, which nobody had actually thought to tell me about. So I think, these sort of things happen all of the time. And I think if you just expect that something might, not go to plan, and you've prepared yourself for those eventualities, then I think, that's the sort of agility you need to be, prepared to demonstrate, whether you're delivering a pitch, a presentation, or, you're in a formal conversation where you're looking for a specific outcome.
Yeah. I think there's also potentially another lesson there in that first example you gave about the gentleman that went to London to do the pitch and the slides didn't work. That I would see that as also being, he's probably been able to build a much better connection with the investors he's speaking to because he doesn't have a deck of slides, because they are only needing to listen to him to talk. and probably building a better connection relationship through doing that. Possibly. It's just that thinking where I think often people feel like having the deck of slides is such an essential piece of the toolkit when actually it can just create a distraction for that audience. Whereas if they only need to listen to you, then they may be more focused on that.
Well, I'd agree with you there. I mean, I have quite a strong view on the use of slides. Now, if you're pitching to investors, their expectation is that you've got a slide deck, but the slide deck you use to deliver your presentation is not the one that you should be sending them in advance. But I suppose one of the things I would always say to people when they're thinking about using slides is, what value is the slide adding to what it is you're trying to say? I think there can be a tendency to use them as your notes. There can be a tendency to put far too much information on them, which is then distracting to the listener. So I think used well, slides can be, a powerful aid, but that's all they should be, an aid, something that adds value to what you're saying. Whereas really an audience wants to listen to the presenter and not be distracted by trying to take in what's on a visual.
Exactly. You've got to be selective about what you use. They've got to earn their place. You obviously speak regularly at events and you're seeing lots of people speaking regularly. How important do you think this skill is?
I think I don't think it's just important. I think it's a fundamental skill set that any leader, regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you work in corporate world, third sector, or wherever, it's just a skill set I think you need to have. And if you don't have it, that's going to put you at a disadvantage relative to your peers. However, the good news is that it's very much a skill set that can be learnt. With the right amount of practice, you can become proficient quite quickly. But I think a lot of certainly startup founders that I come across will often say to me, well, I'm not looking to attract investment, so therefore I don't need to know how to pitch. Quite quickly, they tend to find out that that's either not the case, in which case they endeavor to do something about it, or they ignore it and they'll typically fail. And they'll fail because they might at a later date need to raise money and find that they're not well equipped to be able to do that. Or they'll fail because they can't engage effectively with customers, because as a startup founder, you are most likely the person doing the selling. It's founder selling. And if you can't articulate your value proposition to a customer really clearly in language they understand, they're not going to buy from you. So you don't have sales, you don't have revenue, no business. So I think it's a fundamental skill set, but also recognizing, that the ability to pitch opens up opportunities for you, or rather allows you to take advantage of opportunities that come up sometimes when you're not expecting them. And I'll give you an example of that. You remember when we did one of the pre-scaler events with yourself, and you'd spent the day helping the group move from the first version of their 1 minute pitch, learning some skills and some tools. And it got to, the latter part of the day, and they were spending a little bit of time just refining the final version of their 1 minute pitch. And so Tom Hunter happened to be in the building that day. And so he popped in to say hello. And he had Theo Pafitas with him and Mark Blundell, the former Formula One racing driver. And Tom sort of said to each member of the group, well, just give me a 15-second pitch. Now, they spent all day working on a 1 minute pitch. And one of the things that you taught them in the course of the day was, how do you chop a pitch down when you suddenly find you don't have the amount of time that you need? So they went from having practiced 1 minute all day to having to do a 15-second pitch. And, I have to say they all acquitted themselves really well. But there was one young man in the room who, through his pitch, really caught Mark Blundell's attention. And we were able to connect the two of them after the event, and that resulted in that young man getting quite a substantial order. He got that on the back of the opportunity came and he was ready. And so often happens, you never know where you might be, where you bump into someone who could fundamentally change your business. And you need to be ready to take advantage of that opportunity. And that's not always in meeting an investor or potential customer. It could be meeting someone who'd be a great hire or addition to your business. And often you just don't get much time to actually get that message across. So I would say if you're an entrepreneur, you always need to be pitching and always need to be ready to pitch.
Yeah, I will never forget that day. It was absolutely wonderful. Although I do think that if Sir Tom had come in even just an hour earlier, it could have been quite a different result, because they were, what we had done was really actually kind of dissected a lot of what everybody had brought at the start of the day. And they were really opening their minds up to how they might talk differently about their businesses. But the other thing that I think was crucial was he came in at about 3:30, I think. After lunch, we had spent time talking about audience. Who are the people you're speaking to? And we'd really delved into getting them to think about the other end of the telescope. Who are you speaking to? What are they interested in? And how you're never going to have one pitch that works for everybody. You've got to be able to adapt. And I had literally just sent them all out into the sunshine to spend 15 minutes practicing their latest version when he came in. And we asked everyone to come back into the room, and then he said 15-second pitch. I think actually they probably all did about 30 odd seconds, just to get more than just out in a nutshell. There was definitely quite a shot of adrenaline going through every single one of them, with that audience walking in and asking them to pitch them. So they managed the adrenaline, which we talked about in the morning. Many of them very swiftly shifted their pitch content because of who was in the room. They very quickly adapted what they had been talking about that morning to Sir Tom, Theo, and Mark. Really brilliant to see that happening in reality as well. And they all managed to do it, I think, relatively calmly as well, so that each of them got their chance. But it was a brilliant example, wasn't it, of unexpected, amazing opportunity. And then to know that there was that great result as well of that young man getting that big order from Mark Blundell's phenomenal. A great experience, wasn't it? It was just brilliant for everybody to say, this actually happens. This can really happen, and you've got to be ready.
Yeah, and I think, you make an important point around adrenaline. I think there's a necessary level of adrenaline that I think forces you to keep things interesting. But also, I think there's an important message that I'm quite sure that was a daunting experience for quite a few people in the room, but it didn't come across that way when they spoke. Yeah. And I think, there's a lesson for people there that, particularly if you do get nervous about pitching or presenting, in most instances, I would say those nerves are not observed by the listener. Yeah. It's something that you have that's internal that you think everybody else notices, but in reality, they rarely do.
Yeah, exactly. Your perception is different from the reality of what the audience sees. Just the last piece of the interview, Ken, is where I always ask for your takeaways. In your experience, if you were to pick out 3 tips or tactics or tricks of the trade that you have found have made a big impact on how you handle presenting, what would they be?
Well, the first one we've touched on, which is audience. And for me, that is the starting point. Be really clear about who it is that you're going to speak to. Now, depending upon what the occasion is, you may not necessarily get the luxury of too much information. So certainly if you're going to pitch a conference or an event, with GDPR requirements, you're not necessarily going to get a list of names, etc. But you'll probably get a list of the businesses that they're representing or the organizations they're representing. So I think try and find out as much as possible about the audience. And certainly if you've got names, you can do a little bit of research there. Because if you understand the audience, you can make some, informed judgment calls around their areas of interest, their areas of expertise, so that when you're sort of pulling your content together, you're ensuring it's relevant to that group. You're going to deliver it in an engaging way, but also you're going to pitch it at the right level. I don't think you can oversimplify the value of really understanding the audience. So that would be tip number one. I think tip number two is really around, so how do you go about building out content of what you're going to say? And I always start by thinking about what is the outcome that I want to achieve from what I'm going to say. So, in corporate world, the outcome I'm looking for is I need board approval to, a very significant spend. So that's the outcome I'm looking for. If I'm presenting at an event, the outcome is, what are the key messages that I want these people to go away with that they could take some action on? So start with the outcome. And then I would just get a sheet of paper and with that outcome in mind, just jot down some bullet points around what are the key themes that I want to talk to today and the key messages that I really want to ensure that I convey. And once you've got those, then you can start building the wording and the content around it, and then, practice it to ensure you can deliver it in the time that you have available. So that'll be the second tip. And then the third one also relates to something we spoke about earlier, which is always have a plan B, C, and D, because hopefully things will go as expected, but they won't always. So have a plan that says, what am I going to do if I find the time that was allotted to me has been cut? What am I going to do if I turn up and the audience is quite different to the one I was briefed was going to be there? So an example of that, I've often been asked to go and give talks about, the scaling businesses. And I turn up and the audience is startups as opposed to the scale-ups that I was told were going to be there. So you need to modify the content on the spot. And then, the third thing is if I'm going to use some technology, so some slides or whatever, what happens if I turn up on the day and it doesn't work? So those three things: know your audience, be clear about the outcome you want and the messages you want to get across, and make sure you've got a contingency plan. They would be my top three things.
Brilliant. Learn from experience.
Yes.
Yeah, preparation is the theme there, isn't it? And as you said earlier, time is a commodity, isn't it? And it's often something that people don't invest the time into the preparation they need to be able to then deliver their best on the day. But it is so key. And that's one of the big things that I try to help clients with, is saving time by having a great toolkit and streamlining processes for preparation to make it not such an onerous task, but actually quite a swift thing to be able to do. Because then, of course, on the day, you're going to be able to show up and just really zone in on how you're actually handling the pitch or the presentation itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my early days, sometimes I just had this feeling I can just turn up and wing it. Sometimes you might get away with that, but it's a big gamble to take. But, your point about preparation, I think the value in doing that, apart from giving yourself a much better chance of being successful in whatever you're trying to achieve by your pitch or your presentation, it actually does the homework for future sessions.
Absolutely.
Because, you can look and you think, right, I've got a pitch there. I'll amend that for this audience because those elements aren't relevant to them. So I'll take them out. I'll focus on things that are more relevant to them. Similarly with presentations, you've got a core outline there, which, can be then amended for the next
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah, it just provides the backbone and gives you something that you can tweak. It's no, I think it is. It's all so important, isn't it? And I've had experiences myself not that long ago where I was speaking at an event and I had a 20-minute piece prepared and ready to go, and I knew I had 30 minutes in total to include Q&A, but the person speaking before me went completely off piste with everything she was talking about. And slowly, as I sat there waiting for my time to go on, I just watched the clock and her eating into my timing. And I remember just sitting there calmly and coolly sitting there in my brain thinking, right, I've got to edit. And I was just whipping out different layers of my bullet points. I was thinking, this is how I cut it back. And then as it turned out, I thought I was literally going to have about 15 minutes in total. As it turned out, the facilitator said, no, you've got your full slot. Go for it. So then I was then adding it all back in my head. But the preparation I'd done beforehand and the bullet points I had meant that I was able to do it, and then it's just not letting the adrenaline get to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's been really great to speak to you, and I really appreciate you taking your time out this morning to join me and to do this interview. I am really looking forward to seeing you again at Blair Estate in a few weeks for the core program cohort. But yeah, really super. Thank you so much for coming along.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If anyone listening would like to find out more about Scale Up Scotland, go to www.scaleupscotland.co.uk. And finally, if you want to learn how to be a presenter and be agile across all of your critical communications, please come to my website, www.maryannejohnston.co.uk, for more information on our courses or to get in touch. If you've enjoyed listening to season 4 of The Agile Speaker, please rate and review the podcast. We love hearing your feedback, and it helps move our interviews up the feed for more listeners to find out about them. Many thanks.